All right, we're going to start now talking about mood and figure. Remember, I told you if you have a categorical syllogism in standard form, there are three ways you can find out if that syllogism is valid. We can do Venn diagrams, which I'm going to do in a later video. We can check mood and figure lists. That's the test I'm going to talk about today. And you can test a syllogism through the use of syllogistic rules. That'll be in section 5.3. But for this video, part 2 of section 5.1, we're going to talk about mood and figure. Okay, first of all, we got to know what mood is. Mood consists of the letter names of the propositions that make it up. Okay, so when I say make it up, I mean the syllogism. If you have a syllogism with 3 categorical propositions that's in standard form, the mood is simply by determining what type of categorical proposition each of the 3 are. So if we come down here, this is all mood is. Here's a syllogism, right? Here's what the mood is. This is an E statement, right? E. The second premise is an I, correct? Yes. And the conclusion is an O, right? So that's an E categorical proposition, this is an I, and this is an O. So the mood, and the book will write it this way, is E-I-O. That's all mood is. So anytime you're given a syllogism, just go next to it, and this first letter, that's the major premise, premise 1. This second letter, that's the minor premise, the second premise, and the O, that is the conclusion. So the book will write the mood this way, but here's how you figure it out. That's all mood is. Now, what is the figure? Because you got to know the figure too. There's 4 figures. You can have figure 1, figure 2, you can have figure 3, and you can have figure 4. Figure is determined by the location of the 2 occurrences of the middle term in the premises. Okay, so figure is about what position are the middle terms in both of those premises. Okay, and if you go in 5.1 to figure in section 5.1, you're going to have a diagram on the 4 different figures, and they will show you the different positions of the middle terms. So if we go to a blank piece of paper here, and I'll grab my book here, it's going to be 1 page before the mood and figure list. But here's what the figures are. So you have, figure 1, and then you have figure 2, you have figure 3, and then over here you have figure 4. Well, for figure 1, what you have is, if you have a syllogism, okay, and let's do this. Here's your subject position, right? Here will be your predicate position, okay? And then so for figure 1, you have premise 1, and you have premise 2, and then you have the conclusion. Well, figure 1 is when the middle term for the first premise, the major premise, the middle term is in the subject position. And for premise 2, the middle term is in the predicate position. Now here will be the major term, and that is designated by a P, and this will be the minor premise, and the minor term is designated by an S. Now that's something I probably should bring up here that I didn't bring up in the first video, part 1 of section 5.1. The minor term, the variable for that, it's called an S. You say it is an S because it's in the subject position of the conclusion. The major term is in the predicate position of the conclusion, so they designate that with a P, and the middle term is designated just by an M. Okay, so when you go to the page before where the mood and figure are listed, and if you have the 11th edition, it's going to be on page 262. And so this mood and figure chart that I'm talking about is on 261. And if some of you don't have the 11th edition, or later on these videos you're going to have the 12th, it's probably going to be on a different page number in section 5.1. Okay? But for figure 1, and here, why don't we not have confusion? This is the subject position, and this is the predicate position. So, you know, when you're looking at that chart, the middle term is in the subject position for premise 1. The middle term for the minor premise, premise 2, is in the predicate position. And so this means that the minor term, which is S, and the major term with this P, they're going to be in that position. So if you're looking at a syllogism and you can tell the middle term is in this position, it's figure 1. Okay? Now for figure 2, same thing, we'll use, this is premise 1 and all that. This is, and now you know what the subject and predicate position are. For figure 2, the middle term is going to be both in the predicate position for each premise. So this would be the major term. Here's the minor term. You remember that's the subject position. This here is the predicate. You've got your conclusion. Figure 2, and listen to what I'm saying here, the middle term for both the major and the minor premise is in the predicate position. And if you just look at that chart, remember this is not difficult stuff, you just have to study the chart. So this is the subject position. Right there is the predicate. Okay? And remember S and P, minor term, major term, because the minor is in the subject position in the conclusion and the major term is in the predicate. Because I know when they're using S and P, I actually think this is unfortunate because we've used S and P to mean other things, to mean the subject and the predicate, but it's not meaning that when we're talking about syllogisms. Okay, when we go to syllogisms, the S and the P means something different, though I may still talk about the subject and the predicate from time to time, but in syllogisms, S and P mean minor term because it's in the subject position in the conclusion, and P for syllogisms means the major term. And don't get mad at me, that's just the way the logicians do it, okay? So now figure 4, I think you're getting this. The middle terms, both of them are going to be in what? The subject position, right? Predicate position is this here, and you'd have P there and S, and P is major term, minor term. And then for figure 4, you're going to have it look like this. Okay, the middle term for the major premise is in the predicate position. You know, that's the predicate. This is the subject again. And so for this would be P. The middle term for the major premise is in the predicate position. The middle term for the minor premise is in the subject position. So you have something like this. See, you got this, that, you have that, and that. And that's one, you know, you'll see that diagram down there. I think it's a little confusing. I would just go ahead and use this one. I think it's the clearest, okay? So what you do when you have a syllogism, you know, let's go up here and we'll show you what I mean here. Okay, maybe we'll go here. No, not that one. Let's go up here. Okay, here's one. All watercolors are paintings. Some watercolors are masterpieces. Some paintings are masterpieces. Here is the middle term. Here it is in premise 1. It's right here. It's in the subject position. And right here, it's in the subject position. So what figure do you think this is? If we go back here, the figure where the middle term is both in the subject position is figure 3. So that, what we looked at there, this would be figure 3. And if we were going to do the mood right here, let's erase that so it's clear. Okay, right up here, this is an A proposition. This is an I, right? This is an I again. So the mood and figure would be this. A, I, figure 3. And that's the mood and figure. Okay? So that's what we mean by mood and figure. That's how you find it, and you know where in the book you can look at that. Okay, and actually I didn't jump ahead of myself. When I was talking about S, P, and M, it's right there. Okay? Remember, for syllogisms, S means minor term, P means major term. It's not meaning subject term or predicate class, or it's not meaning term for the subject class, term for the predicate class. It's meaning minor term and major term, though it is connected to the subject position and the predicate position, or it is related to the subject term or the predicate term. Okay? So don't get too confused about that. I guess they are related a little bit, but we're adding something here, minor term, major term. Okay. So the mood and figure of this one here, we know it's EIO. And there's the middle term there. There's the middle term there. If you went back here, the middle term in the major premise is in the predicate position. Minor premise, it's in the subject position. So we go back. That's going to be figure 4. Okay, so if you study that, you will understand that. Now, once the mood and figure of a syllogism is known, the validity, okay, very interesting, the validity of the syllogism can be determined by checking the mood and figure against a list of valid syllogistic forms. Now, there are two different lists, and I'm going to explain them now, okay? And so this is from your book. What you do is you come up with a mood and figure. So let's say you have A, and you know it's figure 1. Oops, okay. Let's erase that. Sorry, wandering pen. Okay, AAI. So what you do is if you find your mood and figure on one of these two lists, then it's going to be valid, but we've got to slow down. This one, if you find it on the first one, AAA, and that's figure 1. So here's figure 1, you see it, it is valid. Okay? And unconditional means you don't need to know anything about existence. If you see it there, you are good to go. Aristotle and the Boolean or modern folks will just say it's valid. Okay? So you figure out your mood and figure. If you find it on this first list, it's valid. Now, what if you have a mood and figure? Let's erase that one. That is AAI figure 4. Okay, there it is over here, figure 4. The modern or Boolean people are not going to acknowledge this as valid because it's conveying existence, it's conveying existential import. You remember, you see A right here, this is premise 1, the major premise. The second A, if you think back here, that's the minor premise, and the I is the conclusion. So let's leave this page a minute, and I'll write this down here. Let's go to this one. And I am going to clear the ink from the page, and let's do this. If we had AAI figure 4, the modern people are not going to accept this. Remember, this is on the second list. It's on this list here. Aristotle is going to say if it's on this list, it will be valid if the major term, that's what the P stands for, exists. You remember Aristotle was all about existence. So here's, you remember when we talked about if you say all horses are white, you know, all horses are white. You remember I said if you're a Martian, you don't care about horses or white, you don't even know what they are. This, for all intents and purposes, could be S and P, right? So a Martian's just going to say, from logic, if every single S is a P, it's got to be in here. We don't know if S and P exists, but we do know you're never going to have an S that's not a P. So they'll say, all S or P means to me, Mr. Martian, who's only logical and doesn't know anything about Earth, all we know, this is empty, and we don't know if there's anything here. So we're not going to make any conclusions from that. Now, Aristotle says logic should always be talking about things that really exist. So it isn't an S or a P with Aristotle. It is actually, a horse, okay? So let's do this. So we have all horses are, and we'll make them four-legged animals. Aristotle's going to say, you mean to tell me if you say all horses are four-legged animals, you can't say some horses are four-legged animals? He says you most certainly can, right? He says, you remember some in logic means at least one, right? At least one. So he says if all horses are four-legged animals, and we know horses exist, then at least one horse is a four-legged animal. So he says you can do this. So what he did is this is A is a universal. And he says universal things about real world objects that really refer and exist to things. You are allowed to use subalteration on this traditional square of opposition. And if you know the universal is true, if you know all horses are four-legged animals is true, then you also know there's at least one horse that's a four-legged animal. So these things here, premises that are universals, Aristotle says you can infer a particular. That's exactly what we did here, though I'm only using one universal. So this is why when we go back here, Aristotle, if you see AAI, as long as the major term, you have, these are the required condition. That's what it means by conditionally, is these mood and figure sets. List here, this list of mood and figure is valid as long as P exists, meaning the major term is not talking about trolls or flying reindeer. But if the middle term is talking about cats or dogs, then these are valid. You remember Aristotle, he says up here, the modern people in Aristotle are okay with these. But Aristotle says, look, if there's a mood and figure that's on this list, it's valid on the condition that the required term, here means major term, middle term, minor term. If the required term is talking about things that really exist, then these are valid. So here's what he's doing. He's basically saying, you know what, if we're talking about all horses are four-legged animals, you people up here mean to tell me you can't infer from that at least one horse is a four-legged animal? He's saying baloney to all of you. Wait a minute, you guys are not depriving me of these forms, because I think universal statements, A's, these universal statements, if they're talking about real things on Earth, they do have a logical implication for at least one. So AAI, they have no problem. The reason these people up here don't like them is they think AA, no, I'm a Martian, all I know is you're never going to have any S. All I know is a certain part is empty. I don't know about existence. Just think of Aristotle saying baloney. You are not going to deprive me of these forms. There are logical moves we can make from universal statements if they're talking about real things, and these are fair games. So that's what it means when they say, Aristotle and the modern people, if you see it here, it's valid, okay, to make it simple. Aristotle says these are also valid, conditionally valid, on the condition that the major term for this one here exists. Now if you find a mood and figure here, it's not up here but it's here, Aristotle's going to say, forget you guys, this is valid as long as the middle term is talking about real things that exist. And these are all valid, Aristotle says, as long as the minor term is talking about a real existing thing. If the minor term is talking about trolls, the middle term is about trolls, the major term is about trolls. Aristotle will say these are not valid, and he will say they commit an existential fallacy. Okay? But for the most part with these lists, if it's on here, it's considered valid. If it's on here and it meets this condition, it's considered valid as well. And actually, you know what, I can't remember what I said about this, but if they exist and there's existence here, if this stuff exists, the minor term, middle term exists, then it's considered valid. Okay? So you have two lists. If you find the mood and figure on this list, just say valid. If you find it on this, Aristotle says it is valid, even though these people don't think it is, as long as these are talking about real things. So you would say valid, and you would put Aristotelian, you know, Aristotelian, but it would be invalid for the Boolean people. You know, these people up here will say invalid. So if you have AAI, the modern people are going to say invalid, right? These people up here will say invalid, these people. But Aristotle's going to say it's valid. So real quick, if you see it up here, and here, let's clear the ink from the page so we can just do this. Okay. If you see it up here, both of them just say valid. If you see it here, say valid if these things really exist. And you might want to say Aristotelian. From the Aristotelian standpoint, it's valid. But realize the modern standpoint will never ever accept these. But Aristotle's just basically saying, you know what? No way, you guys. I disagree with you. These are valid as long as we're not talking about trolls. If you want to say no, we're going to turn our backs on you and we don't acknowledge them, fine. From the modern standpoint, these are invalid, but from the Aristotelian standpoint, as long as these exist, I'm calling them valid. And so that's how you would kind of answer those questions. Okay, let's go back. I think we're done with this here, and this should set you straight on stuff like that. Okay. Actually, there is one other thing that we do need to talk about, and this is about reconstruction. Okay? If you have just E, I, and O-4, just based on that, you can reconstruct what the syllogism would be, its bare skeleton. So there's a part in section 5.1 where it talks about starting with the mood and figure, and you can actually reconstruct. So let's go to this blank page, and we'll clear the ink, and I'll show you how you reconstruct. If you have E-I-O with a figure 4, let's say, here's how you reconstruct that. You first write it out vertically, E-I-O, because that is the major premise, right? So the major premise is no blank R blank, right? This is the minor premise, and it's an I statement. So we know the quantifier, some blank R blank, and this O is the conclusion, right? So the conclusion is an O statement, some blank, and this would be R naught blank. And then what I would do if you first start with the conclusion, you know this is going to be the minor term. This is going to be the major term, designated by P predicate position, S subject position. Then the next thing you do, it says it's figure 4. So if you go to that in the book, you go to that page that I talked about earlier. I cleared the ink on that so I don't have that page. But figure 4 tells you a lot. On the major premise, the middle term was in the predicate position, and on the minor premise, the middle term was in the subject position. So you write an M here, right? You go and put your other M there, because that's what the 4 tells us, figure 4. And then this is the major premise. The predicate term is going to go right here, and the minor term, the major term goes there, and the minor term goes there. So there you go. You have reconstructed the skeleton of this Vermuden figure. You got the syllogism, and some of your problems will tell you the major term is dogs, the minor term is animals, the middle term is fish, whatever, and there you go. So that's how you can reconstruct a syllogism form, the skeleton, from the mood and figure. Okay, long video, but we're done.